The Tribunal.
The Hall of Edicts had no windows. It did not need them. Light poured from fireglass sconces along the curved stone walls, their glow cold and unforgiving. Marble columns flanked the raised dais, where 3 thrones of obsidian and gold loomed beneath the seal of the Dominion, a flame wreathed in thorns. The Lords Triumvirate did not speak as Selene entered. They did not need to. The silence of the room did all the speaking for them. Nobles lined the benches in solemn array, their faces schooled into expressions of dutiful neutrality. Too still. Too perfect. Riona Thorne sat near the front, veiled in silver, her gloved fingers curled loosely around a lacquered fan. She did not smile. She did not blink. Selene's boots echoed as she stepped into the center of the chamber. She bowed. In accordance with Dominion law, intoned the herald beside the dais, Lady Selene Veylor of House Veylor shall speak on the matter of sedition. Her statement will be recorded and witnessed. No rebuttal shall follow. A beat passed. Then Selene lifted her head. Every eye turned to her. She wore a gown of winter white silk, bare of jewels, her house sigil embroidered faintly at the cuffs. Her hands were steady. Her face unreadable. But her heart thundered like war drums. They are watching your eyes, not your words. Control your breath. Control your fate. She looked directly at the central figure on the dais, robed in molten gold, face obscured beneath the ceremonial hood of the flame. A High Inquisitor, or perhaps even Veridin himself. She could not be sure. I come before this tribunal, she began, her voice clear, to affirm my loyalty to the crown, to the flame, and to the sacred laws of our dominion. Silence. No nods. No smiles. Only the scratch of the scribe's quill. Selene drew breath. Held it. Let it burn. There was a man at the Equinox Ball, she said. One whose name has been erased. Whose house was broken. A traitor. Her throat closed for half a heartbeat. She forced herself to continue. I saw him. The murmurs began. Selene did not flinch. I danced with him, she said. I knew who he was. Another breath. I denounce him. The words did not echo. They landed like dust on stone. I denounce Cassian Merrow, she said again, louder this time. His presence was a violation of Dominion law. His return, an insult to the Triumvirate. He is a danger to unity and must be treated as such. The murmurs stilled. The hall held its breath. The hooded figure on the dais inclined their head, just slightly. A hand gestured to the scribe. The quill scratched faster. Selene stood tall. Her voice did not waver. But her eyes lingered for a moment too long on the far aisle. On a shadowed alcove where no one was seated. On absence. She had kept her word. Spoken the names. Played the part. And in doing so, betrayed everything that mattered. The tribunal adjourned with no applause. No blessing. Only the sound of robes and boots retreating, one by one, until she was alone beneath the burning seal of the Dominion.
House Veylor, the Crimson Chamber.
Candles burned low in the long hall of House Veylor, casting flickers of gold across banners marked with the blood-red hawk. The walls were lined with portraits of long-dead ancestors, their gazes unyielding and watchful. Tapestries of conquest and treaties hung in solemn silence. It was not a room built for comfort, but for control. At the head of the lacquered obsidian table sat Lord Veylor, posture straight, fingers drumming a slow, deliberate rhythm against the silver inlay. To his right, Lady Cassira of House Relin, his sister-in-law and emissary to the ecclesiast. Beside her, Councillor Tharn, hunched in furs despite the warmth, hands gloved even indoors. And seated last, cloaked in shadow like smoke given form, was the Minister of Shadows. She hesitated, the minister murmured. Her voice was smooth velvet and twice as suffocating. But she made the public denouncement. Her eyes said otherwise. Lord Veylor replied quietly, lifting a goblet of dark wine. And the court watches eyes far more than words. There are whispers, Cassira said, smoothing the lace at her wrist. Some claim she looked too long at Merrow. Others that she never looked away. How many whispers make a scandal? Tharn asked dryly. One, the minister said, smiling faintly, if it's spoken in the right ear. Lord Veylor rose and began to pace. His boots were soundless against the embroidered carpet, but each step carried weight. She is young. Beautiful. Dangerous in her own way. They want to believe she's rebellious. It makes her more interesting. And more vulnerable, the minister added. The court adores a fragile star just before it falls. Veylor paused at a window, staring out at the pale snow-dusted roofs of the city. His face, always carved from iron, flickered, just for a moment, with something else. She was a quiet child. Never lied unless cornered. Always thought the game would spare her if she played it well enough. Cassian arched a brow. You speak like a father. I am a father, he said. Then, after a beat, but in this chamber, that matters less than survival. Does it? Cassian's tone was unreadable. Sometimes weakness wears a father's face. The silence that followed was tense. Tharn cleared his throat. Shall we assume she's compromised? No, Veylor said sharply. Too fast. He caught himself. We assume she's conflicted. And that makes her useful. For how long? Cassian pressed. Veylor exhaled, long and slow. As long as the Dominion allows us the illusion of choice. And not a breath longer. Then we act while that breath remains, the minister said, her eyes glinting. Marriage is politics in velvet. Lace-wrapped chains. The betrothal to Karin's son, Tharn confirmed. It would silence doubts. Tighten bonds. He's dull, compliant, uninspired, Cassian said, lip curled. Perfect. And Karin is loyal, Tharn added. For now. Announce it at the equinox sermon, Veylor ordered, retaking his seat. His wine sat untouched beside him. It gives her time to accept what must be done. Or to break. And if she breaks? Cassian asked. Then she breaks under Veylor colors, he said, voice flat. Not Merrow's. The room darkened as dawn gave way to overcast gray beyond the high windows. And Merrow? Veylor's jaw tightened. Dead, if he's seen again. He hesitated, then added, but let the ghost haunt her. Let her remember what rebellion costs. Cassian turned away, silent. The Minister of Shadows tilted her head, the candlelight catching her expression, amusement. Or something colder. Or it may stir her into defiance, she said softly. Then we give her something to lose, Veylor said. He meant it to sound decisive. But his hand trembled slightly as he lifted the goblet to drink.
The remnants of House Merrow, the hidden war table.
Cassian stood over a cracked table, maps and smuggled documents strewn between guttering candles. The room was damp and smelled faintly of mold, sweat, and the metal bite of old blood. Old Master Darren leaned heavily on his cane, scowling at the faded blueprints of the Citadel tunnels. Meven lounged nearby, sharpening a blade with theatrical boredom. A few others lingered in the corners, survivors, exiles, former servants of disgraced houses, loyal to a dream, not a name. She's still within the lion's mouth, Darren growled. If Veylor suspects too much, she won't see another sunrise. Cassian stared at the map, jaw tight. She knows the risks. She chose this. You shouldn't let sentiment cloud strategy, Meven said idly, though her eyes were sharp and bright. We have other operatives. Other names the Dominion hasn't burned from the ledger. Cassian looked up. Not like her. Meven rolled her eyes. Not her. You sound like one of those dreary court poets. Selene knows the court. Knows the rituals. She can move where we can't. And what if she's playing both sides? Asked Bren, a lean-faced smuggler with burn scars across his neck. She still bears Veylor blood. She bears fire, Cassian said. And that burns through bloodlines. Darren coughed, then nodded. She is useful, and unproven. That's dangerous. But sometimes danger is what you need. He tapped a finger on one of the scrolls Cassian had brought. This perch ledger, name signed in shadow. Payments to loyal houses. Falsified records. If it sees daylight, the Dominion crumbles. Meven leaned forward. Then let's publish it. Now. Put it into the open court. Print it. Distribute it. Burn the old order in truth. Cassian shook his head. Not yet. Not until we can protect those who rise up with us. Otherwise, we trade one slaughter for another. We need leverage, Darren agreed. Not just scandal. A crown shame still wears steel. Cassian nodded. Then we wait. Watch. Move quiet. And when we strike, it won't be scandal. It'll be fire. Meven sheathed her blade. So we sit in the dark while they throw feasts above. Typical Merrow patience. Cassian smirked. You'll thank it when you're still breathing. Lord Veylor stared into the depths of his untouched wine. The light caught the rim, red as blood, still as silence. Prepare the betrothal, he said. His voice held no tremor, but the pause before it betrayed something colder than doubt. If loyalty must be bought in blood, let hers be bartered. Cassira rose, her expression unreadable, robes whispering across the floor like the closing of a curtain. She will kneel or break, she said. Either way, House Veylor stands. Veylor did not answer. His gaze lingered on the tall stained glass window beyond the chamber, where the firelight from a brazier painted Selene's ancestral hawk in molten gold. But it was the shadow behind it that held his eyes. In the catacombs beneath the city, Cassian pressed one hand to the cold stone wall, the other wrapped tightly around the hilt at his belt. The damp air stung his lungs. Dust fell in faint trails from the ceiling, like the city itself was beginning to shake loose. She's running out of time, he murmured. Beside him, Darren crouched to inspect a fault line in the foundation. Now he stood beside the son, mentor, exile, keeper of what scraps of honor remained. His voice, when it came, was quieter than the torch flame. We all are. But timing is everything. You strike too early, the blade snaps. Too late. And there's no one left to wield it. Cassian didn't look at him. He was remembering. Years ago, in the training yard of Merrow Hall, firelight dancing on polished stone, Darren stood over him, younger then, his voice rough from command but gentler than the world had ever allowed. You don't draw for anger, he had said. You draw for purpose. One stroke, clean. One cause, worth dying for. Cassian, no older than 10, bleeding from the lip, had scowled and refused to rise. What if I don't have one? Darren had crouched, pulled him to his feet, and said, then your enemy decides for you. Cassian blinked the memory away. The cold of the catacombs felt sharper now. You taught me to wait, he said. You didn't say what to do when it's someone else's noose. Darren didn't answer at first. Then, quietly, then you wait until the rope creaks. He placed a calloused hand on Cassian's shoulder, brief, grounding, real. A gesture he rarely gave, and never without cost. Above and below, the war began not with swords drawn, but with whispered wagers and sharpened hearts. 2 families. 2 strategies. 2 fathers who feared too much to trust the fire they'd raised. And when the fault line broke, it would not split cleanly. It would rip the city in two.
Chapter 3. Masks and Daggers.
The court wore masks more skillfully than any masquerade. Selene moved through the marbled corridors of the citadel, her face a flawless study in serene indifference. Beneath the silk and steel of her composure, her mind raced. She felt like a blade drawn too thin, glittering, brittle, ready to snap. Cassian's documents weighed on her more than any jewel. They were still hidden, but not from her thoughts. Not from the way the guards' glances lingered too long. Not from the way stewards had stopped meeting her eyes. The court buzzed like a hive on the edge of swarming. Whispers trailed in her wake like perfume. She could not hear the words, but she knew them. Treason. Betrayal. Merrow. Riona Thorne stood waiting by the upper hall, her gold silk gown immaculate, her smile polished to a lethal shine. A pair of minor nobles clung to her elbows like lacquered shadows, laughing at something Selene had not heard. Riona turned as if just noticing her. Lady Veylor, she said warmly, voice like winter sun. Congratulations. Selene stopped, offering a shallow nod. For what, Lady Thorn? Riona's brows lifted in practiced surprise. You haven't heard? Oh dear. Lord Veylor announced it this morning during the morning audience. A betrothal, to Lord Ulrich Durin. Selene's stomach turned to ice. Durin. A house raised by Dominion decree. Loyalists. The triumvirate's dogs in noble skin. Riona stepped closer, her voice just above a whisper. It's a wise match. After all, your house must be seen reaffirming its allegiance. Especially after recent scandals. Selene's smile was razor thin. Yes. Wise. As all weapons are. Riona's eyes glittered. Oh, Selene. You always had such a poetic tongue. I do hope you find happiness, or at least obedience. She swept away, her gown trailing behind her like a comet. Selene didn't move. Couldn't. A marriage. An alliance to the very architects of the Quiet Purge. A leash, made of silk and dynasty. This was no union. It was a verdict. She escaped the audience hall just before the midday bell, descending a lesser staircase toward the Old Scroll Annex, a dusty, seldom visited place meant for overworked scribes and forgotten bureaucrats. She wasn't followed. Not obviously. Inside, the shelves towered. Narrow aisles wound between stacks of binding ledgers and brittle scrolls. The air smelled of dust and red wax. Selene found the scribe she had been watching for. He was young, with ash-brown hair pulled into a leather tie and sleeves smudged with ink. He looked like all Dominion scribes, quiet, polite, invisible. Talon Pharaohs. He didn't bow. Just glanced at her, then returned to reshelving a bundle of folded parchment. You shouldn't be here, he said softly. Neither should you, Selene replied. He paused. Then extended a worn slip of paper. Not Dominion parchment, older. Cracked. Not marked with any official seal. A single phrase had been scrawled on it in tight, careful hand: Kestrin did not die. She became fire. Selene stared at it. She knew the name, Kestrin Veylor, a noblewoman executed during the purge. No record survived. No memorial. No mention of fire. What is this? She asked. Something they missed, Talon said. Or something they wanted someone to find. Why are you helping me? His smile was faint. Sad. Because the Dominion remembers too well, and forgets too selectively. Before she could ask more, he turned and disappeared between the stacks. Selene tucked the note into her sleeve. Another thread. Another ghost. Later, as the sun dipped below the city's broken spires, she moved like a shadow through the lesser halls of the citadel, passing shuttered salons and worn statues whose names had long since been chiseled away. The guards didn't see her. Or perhaps they did and chose to forget. Tonight, she was not Selene Veylor, dutiful daughter. Tonight, she was something else entirely.
Ash Oaths.
The meeting place lay beneath the east wing, an abandoned bathhouse, long crumbling, long forgotten. Once, nobles had lounged here in scented steam, their schemes woven over warm waters and gold-spilled laughter. Now, moss devoured the walls, and the cracked mosaics shimmered like drowned stars. The ceiling had collapsed in places, letting moonlight spill down like judgment. It glinted off the standing water pooled in the basin below, turning the ruin silver and still. The air smelled of damp stone and old secrets. Selene descended into the darkness without hesitation. Cassian was already waiting in the drained pool, his silhouette cut sharp against the light. He looked like something from an older story, a prince carved from ash and oath, standing where history had failed. With him stood two others. Mevin, tall, composed, braided hair tight as armor. She wore no sigils, no colors, only clean linen and leather, the uniform of someone who had no time for vanity. Her eyes, pale gray and piercing, missed nothing. Kale, younger, with healer's hands and a soldered scowl. He leaned against a shattered pillar like he owned the ruin. But his eyes flicked to Selene with open mistrust. Selene crossed the threshold, every instinct warning her, this was the real step. Not the dance. Not the kiss. This. You came, Cassian said. Selene inclined her head. I said I would. Cale scoffed. Words are cheap in the Dominion. Meven's gaze cut sharper than any blade. So are martyrs who think rebellion is poetry. Selene met her stare without flinching. Survival requires choices. I've made mine. Meven's expression shifted, not softening, but acknowledging. We'll see. Cassian knelt by the broken fountain, unwrapping a leather case worn at the edges. Inside, the proof they had risked everything to steal. Records of the quiet purge. Names. Payments. Orders sealed with blood and buried in fire. Selene crouched beside him, scanning the parchments with practiced eyes. She recognized house seals long considered extinct. Notations beside some names read only, assimilated, bloodline preserved, sigil reassigned. Her fingers paused over one name. Kestrin Balin. Talon found that, Cassian murmured. She was supposed to be executed. But there's no record of a body. No final ledger entry. Just a transfer. To where? Cassian's smile was thin. No one knows. Cale leaned in. This one's my favorite, he muttered, tapping a page. A payment order to a triumvir's cousin. For burning down their own estate. Selene's stomach turned. She felt a cold certainty settle deeper into her bones. The rebellion wasn't a reaction. It had been designed. A purge scripted like theater. What the hell are they doing? What's the plan? Meven asked. Selene rose slowly. We find others who hate the triumvirate more than they fear it. We give them a reason to stand. Or a reason to burn. What is they don't? Cale arched an eyebrow. And if they choose wrong? Selene didn't blink. Then we burn them with the rest. For a moment, silence held. Then Meven stepped forward, drawing a thin dagger from her belt. She twirled it once, the blade catching moonlight, then offered it hilt first to Selene. No rebellion lives without trust, Meven said. Nor without consequences. Selene felt the weight of the blood oath still pulsing at her wrist, the one she'd sealed with Cassian in shadow and silence. Now, another bond waited. Not of affection, but of intent. She took the dagger. Drew the blade across her palm. Blood welled, dark and defiant. Meven followed. Then Cale. 3 wounds. 3 choices. Together, they pressed their bloodied hands to the cold stone of the broken fountain. Something stirred. Not just ritual. Not just symbol. Magic. Ancient. Waiting. The old stones drank their blood like rain. The cracked mosaics flickered faintly, the colors deepening for a breath, as if remembering something long buried. Selene felt it rise, a low, thrumming chord beneath her skin. The world did not change. But something in her did. Not loyalty. Not even rebellion. Vow. Cassian stepped back, watching, his expression unreadable. Meven withdrew her hand and looked at the blood-stained stone. We are bound now. In blood. In betrayal. Cale smirked. May the gods pity anyone who tries to unbind us. Selene stood silent. Her palm throbbed. The cut had already begun to close, but the mark remained. There was no unbinding. Not from this. Only forward. Later, alone, she slipped back through the overgrown palace gardens, the scent of crushed herbs rising with each step. She paused at a broken balustrade, staring down at the city. The Dominion's banners still hung over the spires. Regal. Rigid. Stained red in the moonlight. But cracks had begun to spread. And within her, something had shifted, not just anger. Not just purpose. Claim. She would not simply oppose the Dominion. She would become the fire that swallowed it whole. Even if it cost her everything. Especially if it cost her everything.
The Square of Crows.
The wind tore through the Square of Crows like it remembered better days. Once, banners had flown here, velvet and bright, stitched with lions, thorns, and flame. Children had run laughing through market stalls. Musicians had played for nobles beneath awnings of silk. Now the air stank of lie and command. The gallows had been raised again, its timbers old but still sturdy, and the stones beneath had forgotten music. Dominion soldiers lined the square like cold iron fence posts, visors low, halberds braced. The crowd gathered in wary silence, not out of loyalty, but obligation. To be seen. To be safe. To not be the next name read aloud. A clerk in grey robes stood atop the execution platform, voice flat as parchment. A Dominion captain loomed behind him, helm beneath one arm, the other hand resting on his sword pommel with deliberate ease. The clerk's voice cut across the square. By order of the triumvirate, those summoned must declare their fealty to the Dominion Empire or be marked as irreconcilables. His scroll unfurled like a withered tongue. High Bailiff Tamarin grist. A gaunt man stepped forward. He knelt, muttered the vow, and was waved off. Archivist Dallin Fair. Another. Kneel. Mumble. Gone. The names went on. More knelt. Some hesitated, but none refused. Until General Marathorn, former commander of the Ember Division, loyalist of House Veylor. Present yourself. The square exhaled all at once. She stepped from the shadow of a crumbling colonnade at the square's edge. No entourage. No banner. Just a woman wrapped in a cloak the color of soot, boots scuffed from long marches. She walked slowly, deliberately, through the parted crowd as if the earth remembered her weight. Marathorn looked like a soldier carved from stone and scar. One eye clouded by an old wound. A long crease down her jaw. Fingers curled into fists even as she walked with the grace of someone who had once commanded 1,000. Her cloak bore no insignia, but a faded patch stitched near the collar still showed the flame sigil of the old Ember Division, barely visible, but unmistakable to those who remembered. She mounted the platform without waiting to be summoned again. I am here, she said. The clerk licked his lips. Do you swear loyalty to the Triumvirate and the Dominion Empire, under the eyes of, no. The word cracked the air like a whip. Gasps rippled outward. A child began to cry, quickly hushed. Soldiers shifted. Halberds creaked. The captain stepped forward. General Thorn, I was a general, she said. Before this empire forgot what loyalty truly meant. She turned her back on the Dominion officer, turned her back, and addressed the square. I swore oaths once, she said, voice rising. To protect this realm. To uphold the banners we were born beneath. Not to silence. Not to purges. Not to cowards who burn records and call it peace. She raised her scarred hand. I will not kneel. Not for this sham court. Not for any who hang their laws on hooks of fear. Let the record show I stood. The clerk began to speak, but his voice faltered. The captain did not hesitate. He stepped forward and drew steel. Then stand and die, traitor. Mara looked him in the eye. I wore that word like armor when your kind were still learning which boot went on which foot. You'll hang, he snarled. She smiled, slow, dry, tired. Then I'll hang clean. The captain raised his blade. But before the strike, a voice rang out from the crowd, Ash remembers. Another answered, louder, closer. The flame returns. The crowd surged. Not a riot, not yet, but a breaking of silence. A murmuring swell, as if breath had returned to lungs long held shut. The captain barked orders. Dominion troops advanced. The crowd pulled back, but not in fear, in fury. The edges boiled with movement. Smoke rose from somewhere unseen. And in the chaos, Marathorn moved. She leapt from the platform with a grunt, rolled beneath an advancing halberd, and vanished into the smoke curling off a fallen brazier. A soldier lunged, too slow. By the time the captain shouted again, she was gone. Gone, but not forgotten. Someone began hammering an old flame sigil into the gallows post with a shard of metal. Someone else knelt to tie a red strip of cloth around their arm. The clerk dropped his scroll. The square was no longer quiet.
The day they learned to bleed.
The city held its breath. Selene crouched in the ruined bathhouse long after the others had gone, the blood of her oath drying tacky against her palm. The broken mosaics beneath her feet shimmered faintly in the moonlight, their drowned colors whispering of things lost and forgotten. Around her, silence pressed heavy as a cathedral roof, and even the wind outside seemed to hesitate. Far across the sleeping city, in the crumbling bones of what once was House Merrow, Cassian sat alone before a guttering hearth. His blade lay bare across his knees, its edge catching the fitful firelight. Smoke curled from the blackened stone, ghosting around him like forgotten voices. Both alone. Both remembering. Selene, age 12, Red Garden, House Veylor. The Red Garden had been her favorite place once. Rows of crimson roses sprawled across polished white stone, caged by walls of black marble. The fountain sang soft melodies, and the air had smelled of thyme, crushed mint, and sun-warmed velvet. In the afternoons, Selene would sit beneath the weeping ash trees and pretend she was somewhere else, anywhere else. That day, the peace was shattered. She remembered the steward dragging a girl into the courtyard by her hair, a girl no older than Selene herself, wearing a hand-me-down dress 2 sizes too large and shoes worn to the bone. The courtiers watched from shaded balconies, fans fluttering, smiles hidden but eyes sharp. She had stolen bread. Selene, half hidden among the ash trees, had known she should stay silent. But when the girl was forced to her knees before Lord Veylor, tall, immaculate, his crimson cloak trailing like spilled blood, something had cracked inside her. She had stepped forward. Small. Trembling. "Please, father," she had said, her voice barely a whisper against the heavy heat. "She's only hungry. Mercy is strength too." The garden fell silent. Lord Veylor's smile was a slow, cold thing, not anger, but disappointment, the kind that cut deeper. "Take the girl to the stones," he had said. Selene had begged. Screamed. Tried to pull the steward's hand away. They made her watch anyway. The stones were old, worn smooth by centuries of executions. Ritualistic, blood-sanctioned by ancient oaths. No blade, only the press of the stone, the old way. Slow. Crushing. Selene remembered the sound, not a scream. Screams faded. It was the crack of bone, the wet, final sound of hope dying. Later, when the sun had set and the blood had dried black in the cracks of the garden, Lord Veylor had knelt before her. He took her bloodied hands in his grip firm but not cruel, as though she were a precious heirloom he was polishing. "Remember this, child," he had whispered, the air between them smelling of roses and iron. "A heart is a blade turned inward. Mercy kills faster than any dagger." Selene had not cried. She had learned. Cassian, age 14, west wing of Merrow Hall. The hall had once been filled with music. Cassian remembered laughing feasts, banners stitched by his grandmother's hand, 1,000 tiny moments of pride and belonging woven into the very stone. It ended in fire? The Dominion did not knock. They arrived at dawn, clothed in silence and steel. The guards of House Merrow fell quickly, too few, too scattered. The great windows shattered inward with the force of Dominion siege spells, shards raining like frozen tears. Cassian had stumbled through the smoke-choked corridors, the air tasting of burning silk and terror. He found his brother, Roan, proud Roan, heir of Merrow, in the shattered courtyard. Roan had fought them. Sword flashing silver, blood slicking the cobbles. Cassian saw him fall. Not cleanly. Not honorably. A Dominion captain, face hidden behind a featureless mask, had broken Roan's sword hand with a mailed gauntlet, then pressed him to the stones with one heavy boot. Cassian remembered surging forward, a scream locked in his throat. A soldier caught him around the ribs, hauling him back. "You would have lived," the captain said, driving his sword into Roan's chest with mechanical precision, "if you'd learned when to bow." The blood spread across the courtyard like spilled ink, drowning the Merrow crest. Cassian had not bowed. He had watched. Helpless. Rage burning brighter than grief. He had asked, later, whispered it into the ruins, into silence. Where had his father gone? No one ever answered. Lord Merrow had vanished before the siege began. Just gone. That was the Dominion's gift. Not death. Erasure. Later, when the hall stood empty and blackened, Cassian had wandered through the wreckage, boots crunching over fallen banners, over heirlooms shattered and left to rot. He picked up a piece of the broken gate, a splintered wolf carved from oak, and tucked it into his coat. A promise. He would never bow. He would make them remember what they had tried to erase. Present Selene pressed her scarred palm against the broken fountain stone, grounding herself against the rising tide of memory. Far away, Cassian tightened his grip on the worn hilt of his blade until his knuckles whitened. Both bore marks invisible to the court's polished eyes. Children taught that kindness was weakness. That loyalty was obedience. That survival was bought in blood. The bathhouse around Selene seemed to exhale, a cold breath stirring her tattered cloak. Above, the ruined ceiling showed slices of ash-colored sky. Selene stood slowly, the dried blood on her palm cracking like an old seal breaking. She would not be that frightened child again. She would not kneel. She would carve her own future from the bones of the old world if she must. Across the city, Cassian rose to his feet, sliding his sword back into its battered sheath. The embers at his feet sputtered and died. He did not look back. Tomorrow, the loyalty trials would open their jaws to devour the weak, the wavering, the inconvenient. Selene and Cassian would not go to the altar like lambs. They would bring the fire. The city's bells tolled midnight, heavy and hollow. And somewhere between the stones and the stars, two blades were being honed. Not by choice, but by the Dominion itself. The day they learned to bleed was the day the Dominion signed its own death. Neither of them would forget. Neither of them would forgive. And neither of them would bow. The door opened. The others filed in, Cassira first, graceful and watchful, Councillor Tharn, coughing into a scented kerchief, and last, the Minister of Shadows, her presence cold enough to silence the room without a word. Veylor straightened. "Sit," he said, and they did. He reached for his goblet of wine, turned it once in his hand, then set it down untouched. Her eyes said otherwise, Cassira noted. "She's not a spy," he said quietly. "Not a traitor. Then what is she?" Tharn asked. Veylor looked at the flickering hearth, at the shadows stretching long behind the portraits of his ancestors. "She's my daughter," he said. "And she's standing at the edge of a fire I lit." Cassira frowned, her voice softer than usual. "You think she's in love with Merrow. I think she sees something in him that reminds her of herself," Veylor said. "And that terrifies me more than any alliance." A long silence. Then, the minister's voice, smooth as ever. "If she breaks with us, she breaks entirely." "She won't," he said. "Too fast. Too sure. The kind of lie a man tells when he's already counted how many ways it can go wrong." "She's a Veylor," he added. "But she had her mother's eyes. And her fire. She was never going to be a piece on the board." Still, he turned back to the game. "We'll proceed with the betrothal to Karin's son," Veylor said, the words burning like ash in his mouth. "Quietly. Announced at the equinox. We'll frame it as strengthening house unity." "She'll resist," Cassira said. "Let her," he said. "So long as she resists under our banner, not his." He paused. Then added, almost to himself, "She doesn't have to love the man. Just survive him." "And if she runs?" Tharn asked. Veylor's jaw tightened. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Then I'll be the one who has to send the order." Another silence fell. The minister watched him closely. "Empathy is dangerous, my lord." "So is hope," he said. "But I have to believe she's still with us. That there's still time." "And if you're wrong?" Cassira asked gently. "Then may the gods damn me before the Dominion gets the chance." When the chamber emptied, Veylor remained. He picked up the queen piece again. Turned it in his fingers. The paint had long since worn away. But it had once been the color of her eyes.
Chapter 4. The Trial and the Thread.
The loyalty trials began at dawn, and even the sun seemed reluctant to rise. Selene stood among the gathered court in the marble amphitheater of the judgment circle, her breath fogging in the bitter air, the cold biting through the thin soles of her slippers. Around her, nobles clustered like jeweled carrion birds, swathed in fur, masked in indifference, their silks and sashes a blur of bloodless luxury. But Selene saw what they truly were, not proud, not faithful. Afraid. The amphitheater's oculus yawned open above them, letting in the sky the color of steel and old grief. Wind screamed through the circle like a voice torn from the world's throat, carrying the sour tang of ash and sanctified blood. Echoes cracked off the whitewashed walls, boots, sobs quickly swallowed, the heavy drag of chains across ritual stone. The thrones of the triumvirate loomed above them, unmoving, untouched by the cold. They were flanked by house banners, armored guards, and silence. Beside them stood the Minister of Shadows, cloaked in storm-gray velvet, her gloved hands folded like a spider awaiting prey. And at her right hand, Lord Veylor, resplendent in crimson and coal-black. His face carved from Dominion law. His daughter's existence reduced to a political blade. Selene's pulse beat beneath her skin like a war drum. She did not look at her father. The first accused was dragged into the center of the circle, a minor lord, thin and trembling, half frozen in a threadbare coat. His name barely registered, Lord Oren Veylor, nephew of a perched lime. Selene had seen him once before, polite, forgettable. He had asked no dangerous questions. Made no defiant speeches. His crime was absurd. Suspected withholding of grain tithes. A missing ledger. An unsanctioned correspondence with a merchant family in the outer reaches. Everyone knew the truth. This was theater. Riona Thorne stepped forward from the edge of the dais, golden and cruel as always, a figure carved from perfection and policy. Her voice rang out like a bell too bright for morning. We gather today not for vengeance, but for harmony. Not to punish, but to preserve. A lie so smooth it tasted like honey. She laid out the case in perfect order, not in fact, but in optics. A noble who had let his faith in the Dominion wane. A threat not in rebellion, but in hesitancy. And in hesitancy, there was wrath. Lord Veylor was forced to kneel. The Minister of Shadows stepped forward. She did not speak. She only touched his forehead with a gloved hand and nodded once. 2 guards dragged him through the black curtained arch at the amphitheater's edge. He did not scream. He did not look back. Selene's hands clenched inside her sleeves. Her nails bit into her palms. Remember this, she thought. Remember what it looks like when they kill you quietly. When they make it polite. A few seats down, Talon Pharaoh stood in the outer ring, scribe's tablet in hand. He made no mark as the man was taken. But his eyes flicked to Selene once, and then to the spot where Lord Veylor had vanished. Later, she would realize what he'd slipped under the bench before leaving, a scrap of parchment, torn from a Dominion census. It listed all survivors of House Veylor. The last name had been smudged out, and beneath it, a new one written in cleaner ink. Merged into House Duran. Status, assimilated. No longer independently tracked. Selene folded the paper with slow precision, tucked it into her glove, and felt the world tilt. They weren't erasing enemies anymore. They were consuming them. The loyalty trials continued. Another name. Another accusation. Another disappearance. Selene did not flinch. Did not blink. She was a statue of silk and silence. But inside, something had cracked. Not fear. Not grief. Conviction. That night, the chapel waited. A ruin of shattered glass and ivy-cloaked marble, once consecrated to old gods, now forgotten. The wind moaned through its broken ribs, and moonlight painted the stone like frost. Cassian, pacing like a caged flame. Meven, sharpening a blade with the care of a surgeon. Kale, half in shadow, too still. Selene stepped through the broken archway and said only, "We strike tomorrow."
Ash and offering.
The chapel had once been a jewel of marble and glass. Now only ruins remained, ribs of stone arching toward the stars, ivy curling through shattered windows, the altar long stripped of icon and sanctity. Dust lay thick on every surface. The wind whispered through the silence like breath through broken teeth. It was, in its way, perfect. Cassian paced near the hollowed font, fury radiating off him in heatless waves. His coat was open, his hands stained faintly with ink and old blood, parchment burned still fresh beneath his nails. "This cannot continue," he said for the third time. "They drag innocence into the light and call it law. If we wait, we die in fragments." Meven leaned against a fallen pillar, slowly sharpening a dagger on a whetstone that sang with each pass. "Then strike. Bleed them. They're not gods." "They might as well be," Cale muttered from the edge of the ruined nave. He had his back to the wall, his arms crossed. His voice was thin. "Frayed." Selene watched them all. Watched him. She saw the twitch in Cale's jaw. The way he didn't meet her eyes. The way he glanced, once, toward the chapel door as if gauging the distance. Not fear. Not exactly. But guilt. "Cassian," she said. He turned, breath sharp. She held out her hand. He passed her the scroll case without question. Inside were the false documents, forgeries crafted from the Dominion's own patterns, but seeded with truths too volatile to deny. Secret correspondences between the Minister of Shadows and a house thought neutral. Payment ledgers marked with blood-stamped seals. Plans to arrest rebels who had not yet rebelled. "A spark," Selene said. "Nothing more. But enough to light the kindling." Meven narrowed her eyes. "And we're sure the courier is loyal?" Cassian smirked grimly. "He's loyal to House Verlin, which is loyal to nothing but vengeance." Selene tucked the scroll back into its case. "Tomorrow's feast. The high offering. We let the court hand the blade to itself." Cale shifted, drawing a sharp breath. "And if it goes wrong?" Selene's voice was ice. "Then we bleed."
The High Offering Feast.
The feast bloomed like rot beneath the chandeliers. Long tables stretched beneath banners of crimson and pearl. Nobles dined on spiced fowl and jeweled fruit. Musicians played frantic waltzes, too cheerful, too desperate. The candles burned too hot. The wine too red. It was all a performance. Even the food tasted like theater. Selene moved like a blade through the crowd, dressed in a gown of midnight blue that bared her shoulders and her intent. Beneath her skin, the blood oath pulsed faintly, not painful, but alive. Like a second heartbeat. A warning. Across the room, Cassian moved with equal precision. His coat hung open, his expression unreadable. He smiled when required. Whispered where it helped. Neither looked at the other. They didn't need to. They had placed the truth where it could not be ignored, not delivered to the Minister of Shadows, but planted beneath his seat. A trap within reach of every noble eye. The scrolls contained internal Dominion orders, stolen pages from the Quiet Purge, lists of names, signatures, edicts of silencing. A record of atrocities carried out by the very hand that now lifted his wineglass in toast. Let the court see the blade in its own hand. Let them panic. Let them devour each other. At the height of the meal, as the offering was brought forth, a ceremonial tray stacked with golden reliquaries, scrolls, and tokens of devotion, the courier moved. Quick. Quiet. Exact. He crossed behind the dais and slipped the scroll case into the velvet-lined compartment beneath the Minister of Shadows' chair. Not to deliver. To expose. He turned. He took 2 steps. "Seize him," barked a Dominion officer from the second-tier balcony. The feast shattered. Gasps spread like wildfire across the hall. Chairs scraped back. Steel hissed from scabbards. A musician screamed and dropped her violin in a shriek of strings. Red liveried guards surged forward. One grabbed the courier by the collar and drove him to the floor. Another tore open the scroll case and unrolled the first sheet. He scanned it. Stopped. "These are internal orders," he said slowly. "From the Quiet Purge. Lists of executions. House names. Entire bloodlines marked for silence. He faltered. Signed by the Minister of Shadows. And countersigned by the Solar Throne. The hall fell into stunned silence. Then erupted. Nobles pushed back from the tables. Some shouted denials. Others pointed, wide-eyed, at the dais. A woman from House Arvalon rose, trembling. "My sister's name is on that list." The minister stood. Not hastily. Not in fear. He reached for the scroll. "You will all dismiss this farce," he said coolly. "Forgery. Lies. Planted treason from a known heretic." But his voice was too calm. Too prepared. He wasn't surprised. Selene, watching from the crowd's edge, felt the plan slip sideways. The documents had landed. The truth had hit, but not cleanly. Not as planned. Too many had seen, yes. But some had expected. The Dominion had been ready. Across the chaos, Selene locked eyes with Cassian. The Minister of Shadows stood with unsettling calm. He did not lunge for the scrolls. He did not deny the signatures. Instead, he lifted a hand to still the guards, and looked directly at House Arvalon's trembling matriarch. "Loyalty," he said, voice velvet smooth, "is tested by what we are willing to overlook." He turned slightly, addressing no one and everyone. "And some among us have failed." At his gesture, 3 nobles were seized by guards, one shrieked, the others fought. Blood hit the marble. Accusations twisted into executions in the span of heartbeats. Gasps turned to screams. Chairs overturned. A second violin snapped in two as its player fled. They weren't just ready for this. They were waiting. Selene's stomach turned cold. The plan had sprung the trap, but not the one they thought. Across the chaos, she locked eyes with Cassian. A moment passed. No signal. No word. Only a breath. Run. Moments after the alarm, the bells weren't ringing. They were screaming. Not the polite tones of court summons, but the sonorous chimes of chapel rites. These were the Dominion's iron gongs, struck by fire hammers, reverberating through the stone like bones cracking. Each toll was a sentence. Heretic. Traitor. Kill. Selene ran. The corridor was pitch dark, lit only by flickering sconces fed by whale oil and witch flame. Each step echoed, swallowed, echoed again. She and Cassian raced past flaking sigils, old prison doors sealed with melted lead, furnace tunnels that bled steam into the walls. Heat warped the air. Dust clung to her throat like old lies. Behind them, the boots came closer. Steel on stone. Dozens. No, hundreds. Dominion Guard. Inquisition elites. Shadow priests with mirrored masks and drawn blades. Not a patrol. A hunt. Cassian stumbled, catching himself against the wall. His coat was torn, one arm pressed to his side. Blood slipped through his fingers and spattered the stones beneath his boots. "You're bleeding," Selene hissed, dragging him forward. "So is the Empire," he growled. A bolt cracked past her head and shattered a torch. Sparks burst. An old Dominion banner caught fire. The flames twisted the sigils into black runes. Selene didn't look back. Above them, the palace, the sanctum, was firelit and full of smoke. High Inquisitor Veridin stood barefoot on the golden inlay of the Hall of Chains. The robes of his station hung loose, swaying like the smoke of burnt offerings. His skin gleamed with oil and ash. Beneath his feet, the names of fallen houses were etched into obsidian, scraped clean with every new purge. He raised his voice, but not high. Not shouting. Not theatrical. He didn't need to shout. His voice was measured apocalypse. Light the flares. Seal the northern halls. If they reach the catacombs, collapse the entrances. A knight in crimson armor hesitated. "My lord, some of the exits," Veridin moved. Not fast. Not theatrical. Just close. He pressed a hand to the knight's chest, and whispered an old prayer. The knight convulsed. Screamed. Dropped. Smoke curled from beneath his breastplate. Veridin turned to the rest. His hands still shimmered with mirrored blood. You are not here to serve justice. You are here to prevent contagion. His eyes gleamed in the firelight. Burn everything that bleeds and doesn't kneel. Back in the tunnels they turned a corner, down into the old aqueduct spine, a tunnel veined with dead water and calcified memory. Kale was just ahead. Selene reached for him, Kale. But a blast of golden smoke poured through the tunnel ahead. A dominion flare, sigilled, consecrated. The light burned white-hot. When it cleared, Kale was gone. Not fallen. Not struck. Gone. Vanished like chalk in a storm. Selene lunged forward. But the space he had occupied was wrong. The air bent. Something watched her from the smoke. Not a man. Not a guard. A presence. Cassian grabbed her shoulder. Not now, he gasped. He knew the risk. She wanted to scream. Instead, she ran. By the time they reached the bolt hole, crawling through a sewage channel, collapsing through a rusted grate, Cassian's shirt was soaked through. His lips were pale. His hand trembled when he touched the wall. Selene dropped beside him. Tore fabric from her undersleeve. Wrapped his arm. Pulled it tight. Hold pressure, she whispered. No, he said. You hold purpose. I'll hold the rest. Her throat burned. The blood oath inside her pulsed like a second heart. She stood. Above them, horns wailed, the horn of Veridin's personal command, deep as a dragon's breath. It meant executions had already begun. It meant the court was being cleansed. The Empire had always preferred fire to trial. The noble courtiers had gathered in the silver courtyard, under the guise of a feast day blessing. The fire pit in the center had not been lit in centuries. Tonight, it roared. 2 prisoners knelt before it, servants from a minor house, accused of helping traitors flee. Whether they had or hadn't didn't matter. Veridin paced behind them in his golden robe, chanting from an ash leaf scroll inked in his own blood. He didn't lift the blade. He didn't have to. The flames obeyed him. They rose, twisted, screamed. The prisoners turned to cinder. In silence. As the court watched. No one left. No one objected. Back below, Selene stood, watching Cassian's breath steady. She touched her burned palm to the wall. The oath pulsed, answering. Not just between them now, it stretched. Beneath the city. Beneath the silence. To others. To more. The fire remembered. She looked at Cassian. He blinked slowly, biting pain, but still standing. Still hers. We don't run again, she said. They'll hunt us to the edges. Let them. Her smile was not soft. We choose the battlefield now. She stepped back into the tunnel. And when we do? Cassian met her gaze. No mercy? No mercy, she said. Only the blade.
Chapter 5. Ash Vault, Ember Hall.
The Ember Hall did not echo. It absorbed. Its walls were made of black stone veined with crimson glass, shaped in a silent forge below the solar throne centuries ago. No chairs. No windows. No banners. The only light came from a sun-shaped grate in the ceiling that allowed a single shaft of filtered firelight to fall on the center of the room. It was not a place for comfort. It was a place for judgment. The 3 entered without ceremony. First came High Inquisitor Veridin, robed in flame-threaded crimson, eyes bright with fury held in check. His boots struck the stone like hammers. The fires of faith walked with him. Then Warden Thaler, clad in the bone-iron half-armor of the Shield Corps, cloak folded over one arm. His face bore no expression, his silence heavier than any threat. Last, the Minister of Shadows. Hood drawn. Gloved hands folded. Her footsteps did not sound at all. They stood in the triangle of power. None at the center. None seated. This cannot stand, Veridin said without preamble. The offering was desecrated. The court whispers in corners. Heretics parade the truth like banners, and half the noble houses have begun pulling their oaths tighter, as if they expect a blade. Because they do, the minister replied smoothly. Fear is working. Let it. Veridin turned on her. Selene should have been exposed weeks ago. You stayed my hand. You insisted on her denouncement, and she gave it. Publicly. With her mouth, perhaps. But her eyes were useful, the minister cut in. Better to let the court doubt her loyalties than see them confirmed outright. Warden Thaler said nothing. His eyes moved between them, pale and unmoved. The leak came from within, Veridin said. That courier, he was known to House Merrow. We found glyph traces in the scroll case binding. High work. Old. Which means she had help. The minister didn't blink. She always did. The boy. The exile. Cassian. Veridin scoffed. A failed noble playing rebel in the gutters. His hands are bloody, but his followers bleed quicker. And yet, said the minister, they keep coming. Then we end it. With steel. With fire. You tried fire before. Not mine. Thaler stepped forward. Not loud. Not sudden. But it drew both their attentions. The girl is not broken, he said simply. No, said the minister. She is bent. Inward. Torn between loyalty and love. Then let us tear her the rest of the way, Veridin said. Thaler looked to the center of the chamber, to the shaft of light. Bend something too far, it breaks. Silence followed. Then the minister turned, drawing a slip of parchment from her sleeve. Then we try control before destruction. Lord Veylor has agreed. We proceed with the betrothal to Karin's son. Veridin snorted. You would bind her to a boy barely grown? Symbolism is stronger than swords, Inquisitor. If she marries, she is marked. Bound. Her rebellion becomes a domestic matter. And if she runs? Then she declares herself. And you may have your fire. They paused, watching each other across the dark. Veridin spoke again, quieter now. If she becomes a symbol, it will not be ours. The minister folded the parchment again. That is what the wedding is for. To redefine the story. She will resist. Let her. Under our terms. Thaler turned to leave. As he reached the edge of the circle, he looked back once. A blade that resists the forge still cuts. But not always what you intend. The hall absorbed his words. The shadows reclaimed him. The others remained in place, unmoved. The light from the grate shifted. No one stepped into it.